son of J.W. from a pioneer day. Back when Bonita was the town of Survey, there were just 5 families back at that time, and they were all determined to make life fine.
Okay, folks, today we're at the rear of the First Baptist Church is what I call it, but now I'm not sure of the name of it. It's been through a couple of hands recently and the church has moved. But this was the church I grew up in and I was a part of, and it's this little extension back here. The rest of the structure was built in the 60s. And the other structure could be called significant to me in that it was where my wife and I was married 45 years ago, but that we can't call that real historical. That's not as historical as the little building back here. This building here was built in the 30s, and it was actually the second First Baptist Church. The original was built in the area of Rosemary Park, and it burned down, and they went for a period of a few years. They didn't have a church, and at the pushing of some of the community, especially my great-grandfather Joseph McSwain, who we've already looked at his home, he was real instrumental in getting this church built. And it was the second church built in Bonita. The other one was the Methodist Church, which is also historical. But this church was the old-fashioned wood structure with wood floors and wood pews and no air conditioning. We did have one grand addition for air conditioning while I was going there. And well, I'll take it back. We had 2 ways of air conditioning while I was going there. The first one was fans furnished by the funeral home. Leo Englehart Funeral Home in Fort Myers always furnished the churches with hand fans. The next one was when I was about 12 years old, the people got together and put in a exhaust fan, and they nailed the windows shut at where you could not raise them higher than 2 inches, so no one would open a window fully. They drilled holes in the floor beneath the pews and put screen over it to protect them. And that was the ventilation, and they would turn on the exhaust fan. It was loud, and it would exhaust the air while the service was going on. It was an old-fashioned church. They baptized people down in the Imperial River, and they had deacons standing by to be careful if someone got dropped or something and couldn't swim. They would be ready to jump in and get them, and they would watch for alligators and things like that. Later on, when I was about 12 years old or so, they built a baptistry, which is like an indoor swimming pool, sort of, only small. Maybe it'd be more along the line of a spa, but it was built right in the church out of concrete. They had a picture painted on it, and I was among the first candidates to use it, me and my friend Keith. And we were so giggly at the thought of wading in that new pool that they questioned our sincerity on the baptism. And also it was kind of comical because the pastor always would wade in his clothes, and everybody wore their full clothes into the baptistry, and that was very intriguing to us as 12-year-old boys. So we just got a lot of giggling out of the whole affair. But anyway, you always knew if they were going to have a baptism at the Baptist church because they filled the tank with sulfur water, sulfur well water. And actually you could smell the church, I would say 2 blocks away before you even got there, so you knew there was going to be a baptism. It's kind of like with the hotel down there that has the springs. You could smell it several blocks away. But Anyway, that was a long time ago. I'm no longer part of that particular church, but it holds a lot of memories for me. And I'm just really proud that someone saw fit to save the little building. I haven't been in it in years. I understand the Quinn family took over, and that was fitting too, because the Quinn boy that bought it, he went to church there as a boy, and I think that's why his interest in it. Well, folks, we're at a location now that holds a lot of good memories for me. It's now called the Depot Park, and it's a place where the town of Bonita Springs had a depot or a train stop. And behind me is a little structure, a shelter for picnicking and such, and restrooms, and that is located almost exactly, if I'm oriented right, exactly where the depot was. The depot was a very basic structure and wasn't like the depots up north that were primarily passenger depots. Ours was more freight depot, because the main activity for the railroad in Bonita Springs was shipping citrus fruit out of here, and it was brought to the depot and shipped off of a platform. But I always loved to come down and look at the trains. I always liked to do the things all kids do, put a penny on the track or pick up pieces of cinder that were left over from the old steam engine. And I vaguely do still remember a steam engine coming through here. But I was more enthused, and it's more brilliant in my mind, what they called the streamliner, which was the diesel locomotive. And everybody called them a streamliner around here. And it was such an improvement over the old steam engine that's what stands out most in my mind. And but we were real familiar with the depot for a lot of reasons. One is it was the access to the dock that I talked about at the very first of the walk. We would ride our bikes by. A lot of times we'd leave our bikes propped against the depot and walk down to the Imperial River to the loading dock and swim. But sometimes we would just ride by it and ride our bikes all the way down the little path to the dock. But many times we left our bikes here. Other than that, my aunt and uncle, Reginald and Mary Laura Liles, were the freight masters at the depot for many years, and they ran the express office here. Therefore, my cousin Ronnie and I played around here a lot when I would be visiting them. And our favorite spots was under the platform. The loading platform was sugar sand, had little bugs they called doodle bugs that made little holes in the ground, and we played around them a lot. And then other than that, there was a scale up on the platform for weighing freight, and we would weigh ourselves pretty frequently. Then they had a dolly, a heavy-duty dolly for loading freight, and we'd push each other in that. And then next to the depot was a wagon for pulling freight. It was a hand-pulled wagon, and we could push it around, and it was a little harder to push. We could also play on the box cars. We would climb up on top of them, and we would go in them, and we would, sometimes you could pull something and it would let off the brake, I think. I'm not sure. There was some mechanisms that we could fool with even while it was here. And the other thing was they did, for a long time, they did have one passenger car on the train. It was next to the last car. They had the caboose also, so it must have been next to the last. And frequently, me and my cousins, Frank, Ronnie, and Gary, would buy a ticket from Ron's mother, and we would ride the train to Naples. I think it was about 40 to 60 cents round trip to go to Naples and back. And we would ride down to the Naples Depot, which is right by 5th Avenue South, and we would get off and walk around the depot for a while. Not the depot, but the community. Naples wasn't a big town back then. It wasn't much bigger than Bonita, but it was a little nicer on 5th Avenue South. And we would walk from store to store there. And then after we had killed the time that we were allowed before the return trip, we'd go back and ride the train back to Bonita. And so we got to experience the trains firsthand. And I'm sorry to see the depot go. I really was hoping they would build actually we'll say a facsimile of some of the passenger depots of the old days. We did have a streamliner that ran here, a solid passenger train for a while, but they discontinued it a long time ago. And then they discontinued the freight as the need failed. And now it's just a site that I can talk about the past on, and would hope that maybe someday the city or somebody with the means would want to institute a program to build a real depot, and maybe we could have a liner that would come from the airport area on Alico Road, where the tracks cross the Alico. Maybe they could have a connecting trolley, and people could actually ride the last leg of their journey to Bonita Springs from the airport on a train and come off at a depot, and maybe we could have even a greeting for them when they arrive. Okay, folks, we're at the last site of our walk, and this is the beautiful Shangrila property. And it has a colorful history to it, and we're really proud that the people that have bought it through the years, it's been sold many times, has felt the desire to maintain it as it always was, and just renovate it and bring it up to a nice picture as it's always been. But in its origin, it was part of the development of this town called Bonita Springs. There was two gentlemen involved in the building of the town of Bonita Springs, or the development of it, we should say, and the sale of it. And that was J.H. Ragsdale and then Gilmer Heitman. And there's the Heitman brothers. And the Heitmans pretty much developed the west side of the Old 41, and they were a little later in development. They were around 1925, but J.H. Ragsdale went ahead with the Bonita Springs subdivision, which was on the east side of the Old 41. And we've already toured most of that section, most of the Bonita Springs section, but we're not going to tour the Heitman section. That would take too long. But the one remaining thing that is on Old 41 of the Heitman section is the Shangrila Hotel, which was built, as I understand it, I believe Harvey Heitman built it for his brother Gilmer, or the reverse. I'm not sure. Gilmer might have built it for Harvey. But it was built on the site of the city's namesake, the Springs, because there was a free-flowing, open sulfur spring that flowed into the Oak Creek, the beautiful Oak Creek that was next door to it. And that spring has probably been there since the age of the Native Americans that inhabited this area. It's who knows how long. When my mother and father were children, the spring was a sandy lagoon, and it was very clear because the water was bubbling up in the lagoon constantly and flowing through a natural flowway into Oak Creek by the millions of gallons every week, millions and millions of gallons flowing into Oak Creek of 72-degree water, and children and families and everybody would come and often swim in the cold water and picnic on the banks of it. And the Heitmans bought that whole area, and they decided when they built the hotel on the grounds where the spring was. They decided to put an octagon enclosure, concrete enclosure around it to make it more concise and attractive. And so for years it was accessible to the public, and from the Heitman brothers in Ragsdale pretty well abandoned Bonita Springs in the Depression. And after the Depression, there was no more known of them. That would make a good study for somebody interested in writing a book of history. They might find out whatever became of the developers of Bonita Springs, because they abandoned their project here, and most of the land went either for taxes or was foreclosed on by the owners. And so it went through a transition, but the hotel also went through a transition. I think the next owner, after it had sat abandoned for quite a long time, was a lady by the name of Haverhill. She was a rather wealthy investor, and her son was a senator in Florida, and so that gave her some significance. But she was a good citizen of Bonita Springs. She later on built a home up on Old 41 and was there till she died. But and I knew Mrs. Haverhill, but actually her name was Ossenkopf at the time I knew her. Haverhill died, I suppose, and she remarried a man named Ossenkopf. But that being that, what I'm talking about is the hotel and the ownerships. From her, the ownership seemed like it went through one hand that was not too long held, but the next significant owner was a man by the last name of Mack, and he was part of the Cadillac family from Michigan that built Cadillac cars and was very wealthy. And he previously it was just simply called the Bonita Springs Hotel, but he named it the Villa Bonita. And he enclosed the spring. He actually concreted all the walls of the spring, and he put a glass block wall around the top of it, and he built a concrete trough going into the Oak Creek. So he stepped it up on the spring, but it still flowed tremendously year-round. And the grounds, he planted beautiful flowing lawns and beautiful trees and stuff on the property. And it was a beautiful place, but he left it fairly open to the public, and children, me and my friends, felt fully at ease walking on the property and sitting by the spring and drinking the spring water and just hanging around there. But that's not the case now, of course. We can't freely come and go in the Shangrila, but it's still open frequently. And Mack also bought property where the Barefoot Beach is now, down on in Collier County, and a pretty big piece of property that fronted the bay and the beach, and it was accessible by boat or car. And he built a cabana club out there on the beach, a pretty nice country club for the time, where people could go and have beach parties and things such as that was staying in his hotel, the Villa Bonita. But then Mac, I'm not sure if he died or it went into an estate or if it just simply was abandoned. But once again, it lay dormant a while and it was bought by a gentleman named Dr. Null. And Dr. Null was a holistic doctor, and he occupied primarily the building on the north side as offices and reflexologist and massage therapy and things like that. And they specialized in vegetarian type diets. And he operated it for years. Then a gentleman from Chicago, I think, who had overcome cancer through a vegetarian diet, became interested in it by the name of John Cheatham. And so he and his family purchased the Shangrila, and they were the ones that named it the Shangrila. It was not named that until Cheatham took over. And then he made a lot of improvements to it, and Mr. Cheatham eventually died, and his wife and children ran it a while, but they found it too much to run. It went through a couple of hands, and we won't go into all the details of that, but the current owner seems very stable, and I think it's going to stick, and it's improving from year to year, and they're now having a lot of unique events, and you can have lunch there. It's primarily vegetarian, but it's a very good lunch. We've been there, and it's open to the public.
When people see them, they just smile. I bet they're from a determined Liles.
Well, folks, that concludes our tour of the Old 41 Business District. I'm Byron Liles. See you next time.
The legacy Glenn left keeps him near, never far, passing down to generations. His love is deep in our hearts.